in this lecture 11 of the data mining course and cloud computing, we were talking in the first part about the applications of association rule mining and how it can also be ported into the cloud. And we went through the different types of association rule mining algorithms that are most commonly used, including a priori and FP growth. And also we highlighted a specific use case that we are using. In our case, it's applications of retail and trying to apply association rules to a large-scale data set of retail transactions. And to be specific, we were applying it to a parfumerie in Germany, which is a kind of a large-scale provider. And in this section, we're going to talk about deep learning for generating labels for products. And this is also an application for the same supplier, for the same client, and using a different data set that they have provided us. So let's start in this section. So cloud data mining is a strange thing. So instead of constantly looking for data from clients or constantly looking for their inputs, sometimes you have to create your own data. And if you've ever encountered one of these things, as I'm sure almost everyone has, this is one of these approaches where there is cloud data mining happening. If you don't know, these the outputs of these "Are you a human?" reCAPTCHA things. The output was used to train the AI that Google applied in their self-driving cars. In this way, they were asking humans to highlight where the sidewalk is, the crosswalk, where at some point they were asking what is an airplane, what is not an airplane. At some point, they were also asking, is this a stop sign? Or maybe highlight the train in the picture given. So in all of these examples, this is people being used to create data, and that data can be used to train an algorithm. So with that in mind, there are several applications of deep learning in the cloud. And most of these applications are not user-facing. By that we mean this data is being used to train an algorithm, and that algorithm itself is going to maybe interact with the humans, but the data that you're producing does not. So maybe even your data doesn't affect that algorithm that much, or that artificial intelligence. But at the same time, it helps improve it in a way, or maybe guide it in a specific direction. So in our applications, we mostly aim to mine image databases to generate labels for products. So maybe in this case, apply an image recognition software to be able to recognize what the product, what the image that we provide it with includes. Does it include a bottle of perfume? Does it include something else? Another way is to improve natural language processing by learning over open access literature. In this case, I think, if I remember correctly, that there was a NLP, natural language processing algorithm that was trained over Wikipedia. Another one was trained over all of the works of Shakespeare, because the works of Shakespeare are openly available to everyone. There's also enriching databases to improve search and recommendations, and doing that is mostly by either association rules, as we saw before, but also there's applications of collaborative filtering. There's creating new information for these databases by filling out missing information sometimes, because a lot of the databases that you will encounter in the field, if I can use that word, but a lot of these databases have a lot of missing data. And if it's not missing, it's kind of dirty. And if it's not dirty, it's kind of sometimes skewed. So either use algorithms, deep learning, to highlight the entries that are irrelevant or trash, to throw them out, fill out missing information by looking at sequence data when possible, and also create new information if based on the available information. So you get a network that trains on the available information, recognizes the pattern of this information, and starts creating similar information. It counts as cheating sometimes, but it's also very applicable in other cases. And we'll get to some examples of this. But mostly in a previous lecture, as Morris mentioned, by a previous lecture by Rocco Sedona, the other PhD student, he described the difference between shallow learning and deep learning. And just as a reminder, shallow learning is learning networks that usually have at most 1 or 2 layers. And in these cases, mostly it's computing linear and nonlinear functions, but mostly a lot of layers that are very interconnected and trying to find connections and trying to do calculations, sometimes that are unnecessary. Sorry. The other type of learning is deep learning, where a network has more than 2 layers, and the connections are deeper, sometimes fewer connections where unnecessary are where connections that are unnecessary are being removed. And at the end of it, there is a simple classifier which produces an output either true or false, or classifier in terms of this is A, this is B, this is C. If you remember, there was the application of the MNIST database, which is being able to tell the difference between digits from 0 to 9. There's also applications on human faces, as you can see here. There's also applications on whether what is in an image is a dog or a cat. So in all of these applications, there is a classifier at the end, but mostly it takes a lot of layers before reaching that classifier in order to be able to highlight features, low level, then mid level, then high level features, before coming to that conclusion whether this object is dog or cat, human or a man or woman, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or etc. Now, in our case, and also part of the On for Off project, we have a number of images. And in these images, we have bottles of perfume. You, as a human, you look at it. I'm assuming everyone is human, but you look at these images and you see this bottle looks old-fashioned. This bottle looks like Aladdin's lamp. This bottle looks like a bottle of wine, or a carafe, or maybe it looks like a teddy bear. You know, the perfume industry kind of works on flashy objects. And these objects are easily memorable for us as creatures of evolution, and us as creatures who have very good eyesight in a way to be able to detect patterns. We are very good at detecting red objects on green backgrounds because berries. We are very good at detecting patterns where a tree ends and the background begins, so you don't hit the tree and while you're walking. So in these kind of things, the human eye is really good at this, and the human brain, of course. But how can you get a computer or an AI to do the same kind of assumptions that the human brain does? On the other hand, you have a customer that has a bunch of pictures, and you have customers that come to this client that you have, and they ask them to give them a specific product, but they don't remember what the product is. So what can you ask them? You can ask them, what does the product look like? What color does it have? Does it have some specific features? So in that way, we get to our questions, which are, can we train a neural network to create outputs on the type of content that is in a picture? A lot of people have done that, but in our case, it's applications on perfume bottles, because there is a need for describing these products. And in that case, we would be creating a neural network that instead of just throwing out results, it's throwing out tags, labels, and we can use these labels and assign them to these products. And that way, when the client that we have takes these labels and puts them on their website, every time someone searches for that specific label, they get that product, because this is the product that looks like that specific label. So besides that, we have to wonder if we have enough images to train this neural network that we are thinking of. Because, of course, again, if you do not have enough data, you have nothing. You need a, if you want to train a very accurate network, you need to provide it with a lot of data. And besides that, how will you be generating the labels? Will it be an A or B, or will it be a set of flags that you need to highlight? This is 90% this, or is this 25% this, 25% something else, etc., etc. Finally, the last question to ask is, do you have the computing resources? And for all of these questions, questions, you have to ask yourself during every step of your process. And this is part of the CRISP-DM documentation. If you know it so far, very good. If you don't, you necessarily have to know it, because at every step of the process, you have to double check if you have all of these things. If you have all of the inputs, study your data, study your application, and then based on your application, adjust your data. Based on your data, adjust your application. And do that until finally you have a stable product. So with that in mind, let's talk about CNNs and residual networks. We talked before about pre-trained networks, and the residual networks are one of them, as you already know from lecture 6 and 7, residual networks including ResNet 50, and there's also more recent applications. I can't remember the name, I'm sorry about that. But mostly convolutional neural networks are very well adapted to looking at images, because instead of looking at every pixel individually, it's looking at the relationship between the pixels. So it is able to highlight those low-level, then mid-level, then high-level features that we talked about 2 slides ago. And in this case, you have to wonder, based on your problem that you're trying to solve, whether you need to build your own network or train it yourself. Remember that if you're just building a network that has a lot of convolutional neural networks, neural layers, you have to ask if you have enough data to train them. If you don't, maybe you can find a network that's already pre-trained on a different data set, and then shift it towards your own goal. And this is what we're going to talk about in 2 slides from now, which is transfer learning. But if you do have that many images, you're a very lucky person, and then you can train your own network. But also, if you want to train your own network, that is a lot of work that you have to do. You have to constantly go through the CRISP-DM process so that you can construct a network that accurately looks at the data. And then there's a lot of fine-tuning that you have to do. So take all of this into consideration before actually going into this process. And from there, we talk about the ResNet 50, which is a residual network. Residual in this case means that it has a set of residual layers that bypass, but also that do some addition to the data, so that you don't go into a process called the exploding gradient process, where instead of the image, the network learning about things, it kind of gets very hard into one direction. So the residual networks kind of prevent that from happening by preventing 0 values and by preventing infinity values in the gradient, so that no part of the network is getting better represented than other parts. All of the network is being used, and if something is going, let's say, crazy, it's tamed back into behaving well. In this case, ResNet 50 itself was selected as the winner of the international ImageNet competition, where ImageNet is a database of tagged and very well documented images of everyday life. And during these competitions, we select the network that is best adapted at recognizing what is in that image. And ResNet 50 was one of the best performers during 2015. After a couple of years, ResNet 50 version 2 was created. And guess who provided it? It was Facebook. The original ResNet 50, I think, was created by Microsoft. So you can tell which players are in this game. So the ResNet 50 is trained, has an output classifier of 1,000 classes based on the 1,000 classes from the ImageNet database, objects, shapes, and animals, sometimes plants as well. When I mention plants, you also know the Google search feature on your phone, which helps you recognize which plant it is that you are looking at. But also there is an independent provider who created the same kind of application. So in all of these applications, this is a network that was trained probably on ImageNet. So from this, we move on to our application. So in our practical example, we had images such as these. We had a lot of dirty images, let's say, and in this case, I mean images that are not usable. For example, either highly pixelated or the background is very busy. And these networks don't really do well with busy background, because then you have to create a separate network that removes the background out of these images. And of course, you can't do them by hand, because in this case, we had 4,000 images. To go through all of them by hand would have taken a lot of time that we don't have. In this case, the selected images that we did have were, in this case, it was a nice looking bottle, but in this case, it looks like a teddy bear, but this is a bottle of perfume. But I, as a human, was able to immediately tell that, yes, this looks like a teddy bear. And the network itself was really very capable at detecting this. The network also looked at all of these bottles, and it immediately highlighted that these are perfume bottles, as you can see here, with a relatively high accuracy, 50% here, 60% here, 99% here. But in this case, we don't care. We know these are bottles of perfume. What we care about instead is the other side, for example, table lamp, or in this case, beaker or vase or pitcher. In this case, we care about cocktail shaker. So in all of these cases, these are interesting. This is interesting information that is beside the actual point. We just want abstract information. We don't want the specific stuff like perfume. So we have this specific challenge in this case to create a network that is not accurate. So what we do by applying the Keras module in Python and also TensorFlow, we try to take the network that we already have, and then we apply transfer learning, which I mentioned 2 slides ago. So as a refresher, transfer learning is the process of taking a network that is pre-trained and then adjusting the classifier and then training that new classifier to a different problem than the original problem that the network was created for. In our case, the network was created, ResNet 50 was created for the 1,000 classes of the ImageNet database. But in our case, we only care about the 127 classes that we care about. For example, being the network being able to detect the shape of the bottle, if it looks like a vase, if it looks like a cocktail shaker, if it looks like a lighter, if it looks like a lipstick pen, if it looks like a teddy bear. So this is the new challenge. This is the new classification layer that we have. And to be able to do that, we take the original network, we freeze it, all of the layers that it has inside. which are the 50 layers of residual, the 50 residual layers. We freeze all of them, and then we remove the final classification layer, which is as they call it, the top layer of the network. We append our own classification layer that has the 127 classes that we care about, and then we retrain the network on the data that we have. But then where's the input? Where's the expected output from these images that we have? Well, to do that, you have to first run your own data through this network and get outputs like these, and then remove the things that you don't care about, including perfume, including hair slide, let's say including website, because let's be honest, what bottles look like websites? And then remove the things that we really don't care about, or the things that appear way too often. And then use that list that we come up with as the expected outputs for these products while we train the new network using the new classification layer. We train this network on these images and that newly generated data that we just generated. And from that network, we can pass, when that network is trained, we can pass our images, new images, not the old ones, because of course, never train a network on images that you already know, that you've already trained on. When you have a network that is able to produce outputs like that, you pass new data to it, and then you get the outputs from them, and those outputs are your tags for the search engine for that website. So if you find out that your outputs here are not very effective, what you can do is unfreeze some layers of the ResNet 50 and retrain it. That way you're changing some of the weights within the network. And you can go up all the way through the network if you need to. But most of the times you don't, because the top layers of the deepest layers of the network are the ones that highlight the features. So you need to hang on to these parts. And from there, we talk about computational cost. Because when we added our own prediction layer to the original ResNet 50, the trainable parameters were 25 million. And I don't think anyone easily has access to the kind of resources required to train 25 million parameters. Luckily, in our case, we have access to GPU resources on HPC. But if you don't, then you have to seek cloud resources. And to give you an example, training this network on a high-performance computing platform with GPU access took about 5 minutes, but training it on CPU would have taken about 5 hours. That's if we're lucky. So Google Cloud Services has these resources available for you, free to use. I'm sure everyone here has used already Google Colab, but when you need more resources, you kind of have to pay for it, of course. Amazon Web Services has some of these services available, and also you have to pay for it per hour, as Morris mentioned, per GPU hour. And the same goes for Microsoft Azure. In all of these cases, these are sometimes resources that you need to use to be able to do the thing that you need to do. And this is the point where you have to weigh the cost to the ultimate product that you end up creating. So from there, let's talk about how we deal with bad data. As I mentioned before, we had images that were not usable, but also we had images that aren't enough sometimes. So let's get more images. Of course, everyone would love that, but then how would you do that? Let's train over the same images? No. Let's not go into why. No. And then let's generate our own images then. To generate your own images, this is the process called data augmentation. And it works because mostly an artificial intelligence or a deep learning network doesn't know that an image is the same image as another one. It's just looking at parts of the image. So you can cheat that by taking the original images that you have and either shifting them, rotating, shifting to the left, shifting to the right, applying some color shifting differences. In our case, we didn't care about color, but in this case, in some cases, it might be helpful. And you do this while training so that the network constantly has new information to train on. That way you grow your data set in case you have this problem that you don't have enough data to train. And this is extremely helpful in some cases, and it doesn't necessarily negatively affect your training results. Sometimes it helps a lot, sometimes it doesn't help at all, but at least you know that it's not making it worse, just like as opposed to using the same images over and over and over again, because then you have something called, well, you have something that is that the network is just memorizing things instead of learning new things. And from that, we get to the other problem that we had, which is that people usually easily remember the color of objects, but they don't, but a computer doesn't necessarily have the ability to do that. So in this kind of a problem, you have to think about what is the best way to approach such a thing. For us, it's easy to tell colors because, again, evolution. But for a computer, you have to find a way. Do you go with deep learning, or do you go with a less costly approach that you can maybe do locally? In our case, we went for the less costly approach because they would have the same benefits in the end, but one of them is computationally expensive and the other is not. So Occam's razor, simple solution, often the best. In our case, it was an application of unsupervised learning, which is k-means clustering. And lecture one kind of went further into the details, but in essence, what we did was we take the original image, we create clusters out of the different pixels, and the colors within these pixels are kind of grouped as using cosine or Euclidean distance. We try to find the distance between these points, one and the other, and between these points and local clusters. Based on their proximity to these clusters, we highlight the most common clusters, centroids, and these centroids are compared to the list of RGB values within every Linux distribution. So every Linux distribution has in the etc folder a rgb.txt file. It has RGB values for the most common colors. So you compare those centroids that you got out of your clustering to those RGB values that you have, and by drawing comparisons to distance from these RGB values here to the RGB values of the centroids, you can detect which color here, which color here, and which color here. So that's one of the ways where we were able to look at an image and highlight the most common colors in. At the same time, this is an application of unsupervised learning that is not very cost expensive, and I was able to do it locally on my local machine. But also you can, of course, do it on cloud resources because all of these resources are available over the cloud. But to kind of bring it all back together in the end, I mentioned all of these things applying deep learning and data mining in retail, and I'm studying bioengineering. So how does one thing fit into the other? So mostly these pre-trained networks that detect objects and images can be applied and are being applied to the COVIDNet dataset, which is a series of chest X-rays. So the most well applied network on this is called the COVIDX network, and it uses residual networks, and it actually builds on the ResNet 50 model that we already saw. We can think about the combinations of several drugs within a patient system as a method of applying association rules. seeing if these drugs work better together or kind of antagonize each other, or maybe make the effect worse. There are several applications of rule mining and also neural networks in the medical field. And there are also applications of image recognition in the Human Brain Project, which is another project that we're working on. And this is also a part of the, and this work that we're doing for, let's say, for applications in Germany, but also for applications in Iceland, are part of the kind of benefit the HPC community in Iceland, but it's also not just in the medical field. As you can see here, there are applications in almost all of the possible fields of where AI is applicable. There are applications in neurobiology, there are applications in medicine, of course, but there's also applications in space and applications in ground cover. Sometimes when you have to detect water versus ground, maybe underground resources of water, sometimes fuel underground, even though everyone's really upset at the petrol industry, but still the world still depends a lot on that, or coal. So all of these applications of maybe even some of you already have done liquid simulations. All of these are applications of, as I was saying, liquid simulations, I meant fluid dynamics, but I forget the word sometimes. So all of these are applications where the Icelandic HPC community can benefit from the research being done other places, because of course it's also sometimes open research. So in my case, the research that I was doing, that I am doing, is part of the Smith project in Germany. And this is a deep learning application for a detection of a specific condition called ARDS. And of course, the data set is not shareable, but the approaches are, because no one really owns an approach to solve a problem. It's just knowledge that is gained that can be shared. And from there, we get to the final, the most recent news that we had. I don't know if you've been aware of this, but there have been 2 articles published, both of them at the same day, on the 15th of July, where deep learning algorithms were applied to solve a problem that has bugged scientists for at least 2 decades. And these neural networks that have been applied, they are as good as, and maybe in some applications better than, the standard for trying to predict the protein structure, because where it did disagree with the standards, it was usually unsure which one was right. So both of these applications have been published in Science magazine and in Nature, the biggest scientific journals. One of them is created by DeepMind, which is a company owned by Google. So they had access to the Google servers. This is an actual application of cloud computing there. And the other was by a team of researchers at the University of Washington, which also had access to HPC resources locally. But their main grief was that they didn't have enough access to GPU resources to improve their network. So in both of these applications, this is groundbreaking applications of deep learning and machine learning using the cloud. But also this is solving actual real world problems. So you too, given your field, can find applications of the cloud resources, HPC resources, to solve the problems that your community has. It's just you need to think outside the box sometimes, and sometimes you need to mix one approach with another. That maybe that's one of the things that no one else managed to do during this time. So with that, we get to the end of our lecture. I'll quickly go through the bibliography for anyone who's interested. And also at the end of this here, we have the link to the IAHPC website. In this case, it's the health and medicine webpage, which I'm involved in because, of course, I'm going to flag myself. But also, this is the IHPC website. And I'm not sure if I provided resources for these articles, but you can easily find them on the internet. And with that, we can end the presentation today. So thank you for listening.
All right, yeah, thank you very much, Chadi. That was a very interesting lecture. Also learned a lot and connected lots of different bits and pieces. I think what we had throughout the course, if you remember, we had Spark very early on in the beginning. Many of the algorithms shown by Chadi in the first part or in the second part can be used by Spark within the cloud. We are touched base on deep learning in lecture 6, lecture 7, and then 7.1 in the practical lecture. So in here you saw very good examples of Chadi, how you apply these things. I mean, going far beyond what was essentially our MNIST application. Also, I think what was very valuable that Chadi was explaining a little bit the problems in the data, right? When you go to the practical field applications that we saw today, rarely the data is just like MNIST, right? That you know from the course. Of course, for teaching purposes, MNIST is a great resource, but when you do research, really problems, then firstly, you have most always big data, so you can skip your laptop. And secondly, basically you see that the data cleanliness is not really very good. So we have to work on data preparation, the data understanding, then again on data preparation. So it's lots of work really with data itself before you even come to technologies like, you know, data mining techniques or machine learning algorithms that we already explored. I think Chadi made a very good example on that. Right, I think I stop here, basically thanking Chadi again. And he is probably after that also available for questions if you have.